This is Jennifer Reynolds, and I'm so glad that all of you have chosen to join me this evening for our armchair travel, Jennifer's Journeys. We've gone to some very different places these last little whiles together. And let me introduce myself. Jennifer Reynolds. I was born and raised in Canada, outside of Toronto. Tampa, Florida is home for me. And I chose to show you this picture, not because I'm looking that dramatic, but because I've worked in travel all of my life. I worked for a Canadian tour operator. Then I went out on board cruise ships, and there I had my crew jacket on from the Silver Cloud. I was 18 years on cruise ships, initially part of a duo juggling magic act. I then moved to the purser's office, ran shore excursions. Ultimately, I spent the last 20 years of my life with an oceanographer historian, where I developed some pretty serious love for history and geography. And well, it's been really fun to go through these different talks and bring them to you in the form of what I've called Jennifer's Journeys. And so tonight, I wanted to take you someplace a little bit different, someplace a little far away, someplace you've likely heard of and maybe wondered a little bit about the mystery and thought we would dig in a little bit deeper to the story of the Bermuda Triangle. But more than 2 million hard and soft covered books have been printed about what we would call the famous or the infamous 400,000 square mile Bermuda Triangle, the body of water known as the Devil's Triangle or the Voodoo Sea. I spent a lot of my years on cruise ships. I sailed through the Bermuda Triangle another number of times. And chances are, if any of you have traveled and done some cruising down the Caribbean way, you too have been in the Bermuda Triangle. So the three apexes of the Bermuda Triangle are Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Bermuda, and San Juan in Puerto Rico. Let's look at Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Before the U.S. Navy turned it over to the Broward County government, today's Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood International Airport, was the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood Air Station, Naval Air Station. Formerly the Merle Fogg Airport in Fort Lauderdale, the Navy took it over and expanded it into a training facility for Grumman Avenger torpedo bombers that functioned from 1942 through 1946. Among the Avenger pilots who graduated Naval Air School Fort Lauderdale was former President George Bush from the class of 1943. It was from this station that originated the greatest mystery of the Bermuda Triangle, and that was the disappearance of Navy Flight 19 while on a routine training mission on December 5th, 1945. Although rarely seen by visitors, there is a memorial at the airport that is dedicated to the Naval Air Station and to Flight 19. Bermuda. Bermuda is popularly known as the fishhook, and that is a result of its physical shape. Because of the reefs, the most northerly coral reef in the world, I had no idea about that, Bermuda has more shipwrecks than any other region in the Western Hemisphere. Skin Diver magazine named Bermuda the shipwreck capital of the Atlantic. Bermuda has over 350 wrecks and over 200 square miles of untouched reef around all of the tiny islands. Bermuda's reef system is healthy. It's resplendent with large sea fans and huge finger corals, and the reef system is home for a vast quantity of reef life. But it was here. It was a notorious place for seafarers in the 16th and the 17th centuries. They didn't know a lot about Bermuda. It was called the Isle of the Devils. Coughed up from the belly of the Atlantic 100 millennia ago, this fishhook-shaped coral archipelago, perched at the summit of an extinct submerged volcano, was once avoided like crazy by mariners. It was discovered in 1503 by the Spaniard Juan Bermudez, and he was a mariner from Spain, and the islands were believed to be inhabited by, get this, demons. Carried out to sea on the ears of passing sailors was the eerie, piercing noise that came from the islands. What was the noise that so scared these mariners that they called the cries of the devil. It was the screeching of hundreds of thousands of Bermuda petrels called cahows, and they were nesting in the cedar forests that once covered the islands. 1609, in June, a fleet of 9 ships under the command of this admiral, Sir George Somers, was dispatched from Plymouth, England, and he was on his way to save the settlement of Jamestown, and I'm talking about Jamestown in Virginia. It was starving, and these ships were being sent over from Plymouth, England to bring in supplies. Everything was going really well until the fleet came close to the dreaded Las Bermudas. The ships were within 7 or 8 days of making the Virginia coast, and they ran smack dab into a hurricane. Admiral Somers' ship, the Sea Venture, was driven onto the reefs and wrecked. And miraculously, the 150 men and women and 1 dog managed to reach ashore without a single loss of life. Admiral Somers then claimed Bermuda for England. That's how Bermuda came under the flag of England. The survivors were put to work building 2 new ships from the salvaged timbers of the Sea Venture and the wood of the local cedar trees. But as the new vessels took shape over the ensuing months on this island, which would inspire Shakespeare to pen The Tempest, was the setting for 1 murder, an execution, 5 deaths from natural causes, a marriage, 2 births, and 3 mutinies. Look at the bottom left-hand corner of this map. I love it. This map was written by Somers. He actually drew this map. Bottom left-hand side is said to be a self-portrait of himself, showing himself stranded on a turtle in the Bermudas. So when the admiral and the 2 ships finally left for Virginia, they left 2 men behind. One of them, the guy's name was Christopher Carter. He was the very first inhabitant of the Bermudas, and he was here until he died. When news eventually got back to England of the inhabitable nature of Bermuda, 60 settlers were sent in 1612 to colonize the islands. And on July 11, the pioneers arrived in St. George's Harbor, and the rest, my friends, is history in Bermuda. But you wouldn't know it. The islands of Bermuda were once covered by cedar forest, and the cedar, within a span of about 10 years, were reduced to extinction by a parasite, and that was during the 14 and the 50s. And it was during this time the Bermuda petrel was believed to be extinct. But 18 surviving pairs were found in 1951 in Castle Harbor, which is really, really pretty exciting. And today it's said to be over 250 individual petrels exist. But the noise from these birds carried out to sea, and the sailors thought that it was the voice of the devil, the Diablo, on the islands of Bermuda. Now, a little bit of oceanography. The Bermuda Triangle operates an area of the Atlantic Ocean, about 4,400 square miles. Let me go back. A Gulf Stream is a river in the ocean. It's birthed in the Gulf Stream in the Caribbean Sea, and it flows north as fast as a person can run. Give me a sec. Lost a spot here. Give me one moment. We're going to talk about the Sargasso Sea, but I lost my spot. See, this is what I found fascinating, because Bermuda, the petrel, they thought it was extinct. Here we go. We're going to San Juan, Puerto Rico. Here we are. San Juan, Puerto Rico. This is the second apex of the Bermuda Triangle. During the Spanish era, a guard manning his post on the seawall of El Morro Fortress was heard to scream in agony, and those that rushed to his post found nobody there, only the smell of sulfur. So the conclusion that these guys made in San Juan, Puerto Rico, was that only the devil himself could have done this. Only the devil could have taken this guard. And so this additional apex of the Bermuda Triangle was created over here in San Juan in Puerto Rico because of the castle at El Morro. And there it is there. Now we'll look at a bit of oceanography. The Bermuda Triangle has an area in the Atlantic Ocean of about 440,000 square miles. The Gulf Stream is a river in the ocean, and it's birthed in the Caribbean Sea, and it goes north as fast as a person can run. The Gulf Stream coupled with the North Equatorial Current forms a huge gyre in the ocean, and this area is known as the Sargasso Sea. You may have heard of this before. It is the only sea in the world that doesn't have a shore. The Sargasso Sea is one of 5 gyres in the world's oceans. And there it is off of Bermuda, and you can see the ocean's currents coming in. At the vortex of each of these gyres, and these gyres are true, they are real. The water at the center of the gyre is actually higher than it is over on the continent. In the Sargasso Sea, right there in the Pacific Ocean, the center is actually 7 feet higher than the continental match at the ocean. So the Sargasso Sea encompasses 2.2 million square miles. If you've ever gone across and done a transatlantic crossing, you've probably crossed through the Sargasso. It's vast and it's deep, and it forms an area as big as the United States, all enclosed within the currents of the North Atlantic. It derives its name from what you see here, this reddish-brown weed that grows on the surface, kind of like an air plant. The Portuguese called it sargassum. Interestingly, owing to the surface contents, the Sargasso Sea also accumulates an extremely high concentration of non-biodegradable plastic waste. And we know what that is on the Pacific side, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Sargasso Sea is an enormous mat of really entangled algae, and it's kept in place by these ocean currents. There's no winds here, and it's its own body of water, and it's home to some species of very rare animals, marine animals, including what you see here, the sargassum fish. They can grow up to 6 inches in length, and eels actually spawn here. Eels are very interesting. Eels are fish. They're the only fish in the world that spawn in the ocean, but spend their adult life in freshwater rivers and lakes. Other marine creatures you'll find in the Sargasso Sea: sharks, tuna, marlin, sailfish, humpback whales. Humpback whales. The Sargasso Sea was feared by early mariners. Here, with the lack of wind, the ships were becalmed. Sargassum weed built up along the wooden hulls, and through the hulls, superstitious sailors heard the strange sounds of creatures, unaware that they were listening to the song of humpback whales. And as their ships lay becalmed, thirst became a plague, and dying horses were simply tossed overboard, giving the area of 30 to 35 degrees north latitude the infamous name of the horse latitudes. The area of the Sargasso Sea is also marked with sudden and fierce squalls, as well as tornadoes, which you and I would know the term of being waterspouts. Neptune is also a Roman god. He ruled the sea, and with him his many sons helped rule the islands underneath the sea. The Sargasso Sea is said to be home to these islands of Neptune's sons. The seaweed of this sea is said to be there to hide them from being discovered. Therefore, any sailor who ventured into these waters was sure to meet an early death, and only a foolish sailor would attempt to discover Neptune and his sons. So the Sargasso Sea was not a popular place with the sailors. But interesting to know, today there is a commercial interest in harvesting sargassum and weed. And what do they use it for? Biofuel or fertilizers. So let's talk about the Bermuda Triangle. We have a strange place. We have a swift-flowing Gulf Stream, a huge gyre known as the Sargasso Sea with floating mats of weed and gunk in it, and strange noises from both the land and from the sea. And in the last 100 years, it is believed that more than 60 ships and boats and more than 40 aircraft have mysteriously disappeared in what is often referred to as the Voodoo Sea. There's several disappearance theories here. Sea monsters will pull ships and boats to the bottom. There's giant whirlpools that will suck in ships and boats. Time warps, my friends, not a new concept. It's been associated with the Bermuda Triangle for years. Demagnetization, reverse gravity fields, and even ships and aircraft that will be taken captive by giant unidentified flying objects. And let's not forget underwater UFO bases, which are collecting human specimens for experimentation and exhibit. And last but not least, vaporized by rays from giant solar crystals from the lost continent of Atlantis. Anybody ever heard of Edgar Cayce, a phenomenally interesting gentleman? Edgar Cayce was called the sleeping clairvoyant. He was a famous seer. If you get a chance, in Virginia Beach, Virginia is the center for enlightenment. In the 1930s and 1940s, the sleeping prophet called these firestones. And he said the remains of the lost continent of Atlantis can be found off the island of Bimini, located in the Bahamas, which just so happens to be in the Bermuda Triangle. Possibly. In the 1970s was found off Bimini what has been now called the Atlantis Road or the Wall. Lots of theories will place Atlantis over into this part of the world. Another Bermuda Triangle theorist from Kenosha, Wisconsin. I'm thinking they might have long dark winters in Kenosha, Wisconsin. But this guy named Norman Slater claims to have discovered through ESP 3 hotspots in the Bermuda Triangle about 20 miles off the coast of Florida. He said that any ship, boat, or aircraft passing over these hotspots is sucked down into the depths of the Gulf Stream and sucked into a time machine. That was his thought process. Others attribute the mysterious disappearances to gas hydrate bubbles that are released from frozen methane on the seafloor. But gas methane is widely distributed around the globe. Releasing of bubbles could potentially create air pockets both on the ocean surface and in the air, causing ships and aircraft to fall or be sucked down into the ocean. A rogue wave could rise up from the sea, or a rogue wave could engulf a ship or a boat. Magnetic forces from the mid-Atlantic ridge, it's said that they exist out there. And another theory, of course, is always going to be pirates and terrorists. But you know who had a really neat theory were the Russians. They called it the voices from the sea. A storm, whether near or far, could create a resonant frequency sufficient to break apart ships and aircraft and immediately paralyze human brains, so no distress call could be sent. The analogy would be of an opera singer hitting such a high note that a wine goblet is shattered. But yeah, there were some pretty mysterious happenings, the most significant of which was in Fort Lauderdale on December 5th of 1945. It was a Tuesday at the Fort Lauderdale Navy Air Station, the site of today's Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. Lieutenant Charles Taylor was leading a routine training flight of 5 Navy torpedo bombers, the Drummond Avengers, and the flight is called Flight 19. Flight 19 will be comprised of 14 airmen, including Taylor. Interestingly, though, Taylor had only recently been assigned to Fort Lauderdale. Previously, he'd been down the road in Miami, where training flights were conducted over the Gulf of Mexico and over the Florida Keys. Flight 19 will be Taylor's first training mission out of Fort Lauderdale. A routine training flight out to the Bahama Shoals to practice a torpedo run, then conduct a navigational exercise. Flight 19 will be due east at the island of Bimini. Taylor is an experienced aviator but new to Fort Lauderdale and the area over which Flight 19 will fly. On that Tuesday, December 5th, 1945, Taylor, upon arriving at Fort Lauderdale Navy Air Station, asked to be relieved from leading Flight 19. He didn't offer a particular reason, but a replacement couldn't be found, and he was commanded to take the flight out, which he did, and at 2:15 p.m., they took off with 14 men compromising the flight. There would have been one other airman, but he was out for a dental appointment. The 5 planes had enough fuel for 5 hours, and the total exercise was expected to not last any longer than 3 hours. Weather wasn't perfect. Winds were blowing between 20 to 30 knots. Skies were cloudy and visibility was definitely patchy. Shortly after takeoff, Taylor reported problems with his magnetic compasses. He'd also forgotten to wear his watch, and the Avenger aircraft were not equipped with a clock. The practice torpedo run was completed shortly after 3 o'clock. Because of increasing cloud cover, there was confusion, and there was a delay in reforming the flight for the navigational exercise and return home. At 3:40 p.m., Lieutenant Taylor reported to Fort Lauderdale Navy Air Station that both his compasses were still not working, and he was confused as to his location. He reported that he was over a single island and no land was visible in any direction. "I'm over land, but it's broken. I am sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down, and I don't know how to get to Fort Lauderdale." With the delay in getting his flight regrouped after the torpedo run, and with the compasses not functioning properly, Taylor believed that somehow he'd wandered down into the Keys. The controllers at Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station took him at his word, and they directed him to put the sun on his port wing, port, LEFT, and fly north. It now appears that the island Taylor reported as being over was Abaco, the northernmost island in the Bahamas. The island is broken by the Abaco Channel, and from the air, Abaco Islands looks roughly like the Keys. But in fact, Taylor and Flight 19 were nowhere near the Keys. Asked if he wanted a plane to come to escort him, Taylor replied, "No, I know where I am." Flight 19 now flew north across open ocean, which Taylor believed to be the Gulf of Mexico. Weather began to deteriorate. Planes had flown out of radio range and could not receive messages from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, although controllers could pick up chatter among the pilots. The pilots could not hear them. The other pilots whose magnetic compasses were functioning pleaded with Taylor to turn west, but he remained convinced he was over the Gulf of Mexico. The pleading continued. Taylor would accede and turn west, but not seeing land, he became nervous, ordered the flight north again. Military discipline remained the order of the day. About 7 p.m., Fort Lauderdale Navy Air Station, who'd been frantically trying to work with the other air stations in an attempt to triangulate Flight 19's position, heard Taylor announce that when the first plane dropped to 10 gallons of remaining fuel, they would all ditch together. It was nightfall and a storm was raging. 5 small and fragile planes would attempt to ditch, and Flight 19 disappeared without a trace. Navy orders aloft a Mariner flying boat, quote, a flying gas tank, to search for Flight 19, and it too disappeared with 13 men on board. So what happened? Simply, Lieutenant Taylor, leader of Flight 19, became disoriented in the cloud cover and trying to reform the planes after the torpedo run. After almost an hour, the planes managed to regroup, but after making the first left turn as part of the navigational exercise, they were already off course, as Taylor reported, being over open ocean. So they probably climbed to get a better view through the cloud cover. When they came out, they were looking down at Abaco. To Taylor, it looked like the Keys and the Gulf of Mexico, which of course he was much more familiar with. So following the instructions, he put the sun on his port wing, not aware that he was taking Flight 19 to its eventual doom. Ditching their planes at night in storm-tossed ocean waters, the planes would have quickly broken up in the Gulf Stream. Any wreckage would have been swept away, and sharks would have likely taken over anything else that might have been left behind. The Mariner flying boat with its 13 crewmen, actually 3 aircraft were ordered to search. One exploded in the air out at sea, and the explosion was seen by the merchant ship Gaines Mill. When Gaines Mill changed course during the storm to get to the area where the explosion had been observed, all that was found was gas and an oil slick. Of many of the modern-day underwater search operations that have been undertaken to try to locate the planes of Flight 19, none have really succeeded. There's a strong possibility, one to which a number of individuals subscribe to, and that is that Taylor did stay on a north heading, a very long north heading, likely long enough to have seen land, possibly with enough fuel for them to have gone down in Georgia's Okefenokee Swamp, the land of the trembling earth. So why the mystery over this Bermuda Triangle? It really began on the 17th of September 1950. A reporter for the Associated Press, on what must have been a slow news day, wrote a story about the number of ships and planes that had disappeared off the Florida coast. The story's headline was "Sea Puzzles Still Baffle Men in Push-Button Age." Other news services picked up his story, and a legend was about to be born. 2 years later, Fate, a still published magazine of paranormal phenomena, printed "Sea Mystery at Our Back Door," a short article by George Sand covering the loss of several planes and ships, including the loss of Flight 19. American Legion magazine, it was claimed that the flight leader had been heard saying, "We are entering white water. Nothing seems right. We don't know where we are. The water is green, no white." It was also claimed that officials at the Navy Board of Inquiry stated that the planes, quote, "flew off to Mars," unquote. And this was the first article to connect the supernatural to Flight 19. But it was Vincent Gaddis in Argosy in February 1964. Argosy was a men's adventure magazine. He took Flight 19 to another level. The deadly Bermuda Triangle. He would build on this article with a more detailed book, which was called Invisible Horizons, the next year. In 1968, the Atlantis Road is discovered off of Bimini in the Bahamas. Now the connection is made between Edgar Cayce's Lost Continent of Atlantis and the disappearance in Bermuda. Others would follow with their own works, including George Wallace Spencer's Limbo of the Lost in 1969 and Charles Berlitz's in 1974, The Bermuda Triangle. Here were aliens from outer space and Lieutenant Taylor screaming, "Don't come after me, it looks like they're coming from out of space." In June 1975, the ISIS Center for Research and Study of Esoteric Arts and Science canceled its Bermuda Triangle cruise on Holland America's Veendam when psychics began to, quote, "receive impressions, dreams, and feelings of a negative nature about the outcome of the trip," unquote. The press got a hold of it, as did the psychics. In 1970, the Office of the Oceanographer of the Navy produced a film called The Desert Sea, and although the subject dealt with the Sargasso Sea, the mysterious disappearance of Flight 19 was used as an introduction, with no explanations being offered. The mystery still continues to be brought to us thanks to television specials offered by History Channels and Discovery Channel's Unexplained Mysteries, narrated by Leonard Nimoy, Dr. Spock of the Enterprise. In summary, the Bermuda Triangle is one of the busiest in the world, including the ocean bottom and sub-bottom. U.S. Navy and civilian oceanographic ships frequently conduct research in this area and find it to be completely stable with no abnormal magnetic activity, no unusual volcanoes, and virtually no seismic disturbances at all. The official conclusion of the U.S. Navy Board of Investigation into Flight 19 stated that the disappearance was caused by a temporary mental confusion resulting from faulty judgment on the part of the flight leader and instructor, Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, in permitting himself to lose knowledge of his general position relative to the peninsula of Florida. In 1991, it appeared the mystery of Flight 19 had been solved. An ocean engineer by the name of Graham Hawkes had been combing the ocean floors off of Florida in search of some Spanish galleons. He thinks that there's as many as 30 galleons broken apart by the Gulf Stream. And what he found was the remains of 5 torpedo bombers in 800 feet of water. They did not turn out to be Flight 19, though. They turned out to be some other, that era of bombers between 1943 and 1945, but they were not from Flight 19. So what can I say? It could be the sea. It could be aliens. Is it a manufactured mystery? It's pretty hard to say. But one thing I know for sure, I don't think we're ever really going to know for sure with the Bermuda Triangle. We've had some fun traveling to a variety of places together recently. The Galapagos Islands, a transit and some history of the Panama Canal. We took a look at Italy and spent some in-depth time in Venice. A closer look at Ireland and the Cliffs of Moher on the west. In South America, we looked at Machu Picchu, the Peruvian Amazon, and a place dear to my heart, the Antarctic. I want to say thanks to everyone for joining me recently on my Jennifer's Journeys. Earlier this week, we took a trip to Africa, to Tanzania, and we'll be back on Friday of this week and again next week on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for some new topics. And I think maybe we'll look at a little history of the Titanic, maybe spend a little bit of time in Russia, possibly do some time in Egypt as well. But please join me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday until the beginning of May, same time, same link, 7 p.m. And know that these are always recorded and available for you on Jennifer Reynolds Travels, both on Facebook and on YouTube. And our friends at www.collagetravelradio.com play great music, share some wonderful travel tips, and in fact host us on an armchair travel every Sunday afternoon at 1 p.m. Travel strong, my friends. To travel is to live, and to live is to travel. This is Jennifer Reynolds. Thank you so much for joining me on our armchair travel journeys, and I look forward to having you with me again.